All right, this is for week 5, Descartes, Hume, and Kant on morality. Now this is a very difficult section of the text, one of the most difficult, so I'm going to be spending a little bit of time on it. The section on Descartes is relatively straightforward to understand what Descartes is saying. But the main thing is he introduces the problems that have been with us ever since his time. He introduces the concept that man seems to be both free in his thinking and in his will, but also determined. We live in a mechanistic universe that is run by the laws of nature in a completely deterministic way, and that every action seems to be preordained from God, if God is all-knowing and all-powerful. For example, I move my finger like this. From my point of view, it's a free action. I willed it and it happened. But if you take the idea of preordination seriously, that event, that act, and this one, has been preordained since the beginning of time by God. How do we resolve that contradiction? Well, Descartes says we can't conceptualize it. It's beyond our understanding. Nevertheless, it seems to be a real problem. And he also points out that we need to be free in order to be morally responsible. It would be ridiculous to say that as a defense in a murder trial, well, you know, hey, the murder was, my pulling the trigger was preordained since the beginning of time, so I'm not responsible. Obviously, we need to be free. So, in general, Descartes introduces this problem. Well, how is the human mind connected to the natural world? Well, Hume, as you know, is a skeptic. And he puts severe limits on our knowledge about the world and even about ourselves. Hume is very difficult to understand, and he's easy to reject. You just want to read it and say, well, this is just nonsense. But most philosophers, since his time, have taken the problems that he has introduced in this section very seriously. Believe it or not, very seriously. Now, one thing is that you need to pay very close attention to his definition of reason on page 112. Reason for Hume is only about factual knowledge and the relations of ideas. Well, here's a fact. Here's a hammer. Okay? That's factual knowledge, either true or false. All bachelors are unmarried. That's relations of ideas. Now let's focus on factual knowledge, the kind of factual knowledge that Hume says we have, or don't have. Here's the hammer again. Now, if I let go of it a little bit, we think it's going to fall. Do we know it's going to fall, according to Hume? No. It has in the past, okay? That's what we know, or that's what our memories tell us. But we don't know that it will fall in the future. Oh, well, there it goes. But that really confirms our habit of thinking, yeah, when you drop things, things will fall. But we don't know that they always will fall. We don't know, for example, that all men are mortal, as so a few of you said in one discussion. We don't know that. We know that people have been born and died in the past, but we don't know that will continue to. There's no single fact in the universe that implies another fact. For example, we don't know from the existence of oxygen that when you combine it with hydrogen, it will create water. There's nothing in the concept or the fact of the existence of of oxygen that implies the existence of water. All right. That's how this whole thing with I can't derive ought from is gets started. This whole problem, again, very serious from a philosopher's point of view, hundreds of articles since then, still probably not really resolved. Think of it this way. It's a fact that the speed limit is 65. If I go from that fact to we ought to obey the speed limit, there is a leap. It's a different kind of judgment. You can't deduce from the fact that it's 65 that we ought to go 65. Human beings can lie. how do you get from there to the fact or the idea that we ought not to lie? Hume says there is no rational connection. The way that this ought get introduced into the world is that it arises from sentiments that we have. And sentiments are these, what he calls mild or gentle feelings of approval or approbation for something that we feel is good when we contemplate it. For example, we contemplate the way Pittsburgh kept fighting back. And so we admire or approve of that determination, and so we tend to think of determination as a virtue. But the fact was, okay, that Pittsburgh kept fighting back. But we have a feeling about it that turns that into a virtue, that we think it's virtuous that they did that. That's not a fact in the world, that's a feeling in us. So, for another example, let's say here's a perfect shiny circle. But the circle, the properties of a circle are mathematical. Our liking it, our thinking it's beautiful, arises from something in us. Beauty, virtue are projected properties. They are not in the world, they arise from feelings in us that we then project back out into the world and think of them as being in the world. They're not. So that's very hard for some people to understand because of this whole idea, the projected properties. But keep thinking about it, and also use the learning object that I gave you that's in the course that deals with the incident of 9/11. I think it's a very good exercise. Okay, the other thing to remember is the top of page 14, or on page 114. It is near the top. Remember that this is a disinterested feeling. It's not selfishness. It's not just your feeling. Hume is saying that human beings are wired the same way everywhere. So this is the way people are. Now, Kant takes the exact opposite view. Morality depends on reason. It's not irrelevant to reason. It depends on it because reason he defines differently on page 116 and on 117. It's a universal human capacity that apprehends the limits of our knowledge and separates us from the worlds of the senses. And Kant is saying something very important. You'll see on page 117. We live in two worlds, the natural world and the intelligible world. So pay very close attention to that and think about what that means. Kant is saying that since morality depends on reason, it does not a function of happiness or consequences or feelings, but duty. And then he connects that concept with two very, very important ideas in the history of philosophy that have been monumentally influential in all of thought since then. And you see it in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and many, many other areas of life. He says that the only thing in this world, or even beyond it, that is good in itself is a good will. Very profound and influential concept. He connects that with the rules for using a good will, and that is the categorical imperative, which you'll see on page 120. Everyone should know, Kant, you immediately say, oh, the categorical imperative, and you should know what it is and what it says. So it's the rules for thinking and willing. One clue or sort of guidepost that you can use for helping you understand Kant is, in my opinion, you won't be too far wrong if you think of Kant as taking the Christian attitude or perception of our moral responsibility, the way morality works, and then just rationalize it. In other words, Kant is Christianity on steroids without God. It's maybe hard for you to think of it that way, but that's, I think, a very productive way of thinking of it. So he takes Christian principles and actually improves them, in my view. He makes them communicable on a completely rational, discursive level, and makes them very, very powerful. So good luck with this, these difficult sections. Spend time on them. Use the learning objects, and ask me if you have any questions.